Welcome to the Resident Fellow Symposium 2019 here at RSNA. My name is David Terrio. I'm a resident at Emory University, and I will be the moderator for today's career transition panel. I'd like to invite all our panelists to come up. We can get started. So the way it's going to be a discussion, a question and answer session. I will be introducing each of our panelists, and then we'll have two microphones set up in the center aisles, and you can come forward and please ask any questions you might have. All right, looks like we have all our panelists here, so I'll go ahead and start with our introductions. First off, we have Dr. Lauren Golding. She is a private practice radiologist at Triad Radiology Associates in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. She is a specialist in pediatric radiology and women's imaging. Then we have Dr. Jordan Gross. He is an academic radiologist and assistant professor of clinical radiology at the Keck Hospital of the University of Southern Cal, and he specializes in musculoskeletal imaging. Third, we have Dr. Richard Heller III. He is a private practice radiologist, pediatric trained. He's the current VP of Clinical Services and the National Director of Pediatric Radiology at Radiology Partners. And last, we have Dr. Lucy Spilluto. She's an academic radiologist at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee, with a career focus on women's imaging. She's an assistant professor of radiology and a fellow in the VA Quality Scholars Program. So those are our panelists. As I said, this is going to be a question and answer session, so we do have those two microphones. So please feel free to come forward and ask any questions that you have for our panelists. But to get us started, I'll pose one to the entire group. So what recommendations do you have for choosing your first job out of training?
So hi, I'm Lucy Spilluto. I have changed jobs since I was out of residency, so I'll tell you my path so you can understand if you have any questions. Out of my women's imaging fellowship, I first took a job in a private practice in Nashville for about 2 years, and then I went back to academics after that, and I've been at Vanderbilt for about 5 years, and I'm actually also currently actively involved in a health services research fellowship. So I've done a few different things in my career. I think when you're looking at your first job, you have to know what some of the most important things are to you. Like if you specifically have to be in one area, then I would go to that area, because otherwise, even if you find a perfect job somewhere else, you're going to spend all your time thinking about wishing you were with your family somewhere else. So really understanding and prioritizing what's important to you and what's important within the job, and sort of understanding your own personal priorities, I think would be what I would say is really important about finding your first job.
So I'm the exact opposite of Lucy. I started off in academics for 2 years. So I finished residency and fellowship at Wake Forest and stayed on there in the departments of breast imaging and pediatric imaging for a couple years. And then I took the jump from academics into private practice. I would echo what Lucy said. I originally took the job in academics for geographic reasons. That's where my family was. I kind of needed to be in that area. I liked it, but I didn't love it. I really enjoyed some of the business aspects of things, and I was getting involved in health policy and doing some advocacy things, and I really saw my role more in a private practice where I could get more into the business part of running a business, and I liked that aspect of it. So when I did that, I really developed my role in private practice, and I was able to fulfill my passion, as you speak. And I do a lot of work for the ACR now for health policy, and that's my hobby, basically. I work, I do health policy, I have 3 small children. That's the extent of my social complexity, but I get joy from that, so that makes me happy, and that's where I found my role. Academics was great for me. The schedule was a little bit more flexible. There were some timing things that were more pleasant about academics than private practice, but for me, it met more of my needs. So to Lucy's point, I think you find what fulfills your passion, what makes you happy, and you go for that. And for both of our examples, it's flexible. If you find something that's not working for you, then you look at your other options and can change, and I think that's fairly easy to do, especially early on within the first couple of years.
Yeah, I would echo, excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold, but I would echo a little bit. I would echo what Lucy and Lauren were saying. What I tell my residents, some of whom are in the audience, is that when you're looking for your first job, I think we're in this pattern of we did residency, fellowship, and you think that this is going to be it, but don't always treat your first job as that this is going to have to be the end-all, be-all. I tell them, treat your first job as teaching you what you really want. I've had 2 academic jobs. I was at Vanderbilt, now I'm at USC. I liked my job at Vanderbilt. I realized that I wanted to do academics. but I really liked Southern California. So, I think we were just in this gear of like, oh, this is it. This is my first job. Like, this is what it's going to be. And I think I think if you take the first job as, what do I really want? I think that's the best way to handle it. Sorry.
I'll be exceptionally brief. I'll just emphasize one thing you said, which is that your first job does not have to be your last job. So it's a huge decision. Yeah, it totally is. But is it like the momentous biggest thing? No, I mean, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Like, it's fine. So yeah, you make a decision, you look for it, you hope it works out, put your effort into it, and if it doesn't, it's not the end of the world. Is that fair? Yeah. There you go.
You said that much nicer.
It's very succinct.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Carrie Vincenti. I'm a fourth-year radiology resident in Philadelphia, and I have a two-part question. The first is, a number of you mentioned, knowing the market, knowing the area you're going to, and what you can negotiate. Are there any particular resources that you can advise us of, like, websites that we can go to, or resources that we can look at that would give us an idea of what the typical salary ranges for that market, that area of the country, I guess, for radiologists? And then the second is, in particular, as a woman, I know that I've heard a number of people say that women negotiate better for others than for themselves. So I was wondering if you could just speak about, in negotiating your job for your jobs, if there's any tips that you can give on, how we can be better advocates, and what certain things maybe are easier to negotiate when you're coming to the table.
Bill, I'm sure. I'll start. I have kind of an unorthodox opinion. I think that might diverge from most people on this topic. I believe very strongly in negotiation. I think it's important. I think it's important with negotiating your contracts with your private payers and negotiating with your hospital. Negotiating your job contract in an academic center or private practice is, there's really not a lot of room for that. I mean, it's a cookie cutter contract for partnership. It's a cookie cutter contract for academic people. I honestly think if you go in there demanding this and that be changed, you don't look very good for the people that are trying to hire you. Obviously, if a lawyer tells you that this is extremely unfavorable and you shouldn't do that, then maybe you don't take that job. But trying to negotiate little points or ask for more money, that's practice is set up that way. If you don't agree with it, then my suggestion is to look for a different job. That being said, your point about women negotiators, I have never experienced in my tenure in academics or private practice me being offered anything different than other people in my job contracts, at least. And I think it's important to be aware of that, but it's not something that I've seen in the real world in any of my job contracts. So that's just my opinion. I think we have to be careful with how aggressive you come across in your contract negotiations. I know when we interview people, if their first thing is, well, can I get more money? Can I get more vacation than the current partners? I mean, you don't look like a team player in that. So you have to be careful with that.
I agree. From an academic perspective, I didn't really think there was much room for negotiation, so I didn't really even think about it. I think things like start dates and things like that were things that I felt like I needed an extra couple of weeks. But other than that, as far as negotiating, as far as academics, I don't really think there's a lot of room. You want to try to set off on a good foot, so I didn't want to ask for too much within the first, just as I was coming in.
I would agree with Lauren. When I interviewed for my job for private practice, there was essentially no room for negotiation. It was, this is our standard contract. I had it reviewed by a lawyer. It seemed reasonable, and there wasn't really any wiggle room. The one thing I did ask them about that was not in the contract was I asked them about maternity leave, because there was no stated policy. And I said, do you have a maternity leave policy? And they said no. And I said, have you thought about instituting a maternity leave policy? And they said no. To me, it didn't matter if the maternity leave policy was that you get no time. I just thought it was fair to know what it was and to have it in writing so that if that situation presented itself, I would know what the expectations were. So there might be little things that you have questions about that you want answered. And I think it's fair to get clarification and to have your questions answered, but I agree that often there isn't a lot of room for huge negotiation. I think in academics, if you're if you have a very research-driven career, you may want to negotiate for things in your research package, like your startup package, lab support, things like that, which might be a little bit different than a straight clinical practice. But just the salary negotiation, I agree, you don't want to really push the envelope too much unless it seems really unreasonable. And then, like Lauren said, if it seems really unreasonable, then maybe that's not the right place for you.
So I'll address a different part of your question, which was resources. So if there's a website, like, I don't know it. And maybe there is, maybe it's on Glassdoor, I don't know. But if you're here in this room, you've already done like the best step, which is networking, meeting your colleagues. By far, without question, your best resource is going to be your colleagues, like for sure. People that train with you, that are ahead of you, people that you know through things like this, by far your best resource. Hey, so you're going to the same area, right? Because what are they talking to you about? You'll talk to your friends, you'll find out. And that's by far, at least that's my opinion, that's by far your best resource.
All right.
Just one more quick point on that. My opinion is your job in a private practice or an academic center, when you first start, your job is to get there and be the best radiologist you can. You work hard, you do what you can, you prove yourself to that practice. Then once you've done that, then you have the flexibility to negotiate a little bit, not necessarily with money, but you negotiate with, hey, would it be okay for me to get a couple days off to go to this meeting or that? But that's after years of proving that you really are adding value to that practice. You can't come in day one and say, okay, I deserve this or that, or make sure that I get some special treatment compared to someone else.
Looks like we have another question.
Hi, my name is Matt. I'm an R4, and we'll be going into pediatric fellowship at Boston Children's next year. Seeing two pediatric radiologists on one panel is rare, so I'm sorry, I'm going to ask them a pediatric question. I always, a lot of my attendings give me a hard time and say, why do you want to do a fellowship in unemployment? But it seems like there's a lot of opportunities in pediatrics, both in private practice and in academics, and we don't hear a lot about the private practice aspects, but it sounds like you guys have worked on both sides, and if you could just comment a little bit on the transition to and from each, and what you guys have seen about the benefits specifically in pediatrics for that.
Sure. So I'm happy to go first now. I'm curious to hear what Warren's comments are. So the question was about pediatric radiology and private practice. So I feel like if you want to go into private practice, and there are a million reasons, it's a different conversation that you want to do that, in most places, you're probably not going to do 100% of your subspecialty. So you did a neuro fellowship, you're probably not going to do 100% neuro. Some places you will. But I feel like MSK, same thing. Peds is the exact same thing. You're a peds person, but if you're in private practice, you kind of got to be okay doing some other stuff too in most private practice institutions. Not 100%, but in most of the ones that I know about, that's the way. And if you're a private practice radiologist who's fellowship trained in peds, man, and you're willing to do general radiology, do the other stuff, like read the PE CTs and stuff like that, that's a very valuable commodity because people that are not peds trained really get scared and freaked out by peds. And it's job security for me. And for the record, they do a fine job, but I just make sure they're a little unsteady because it was job security for me. Whenever they would read a pyloric ultrasound, I would send them a quick note. I see what you're saying here, but in the end, they got it right. But I don't want them totally steady about what they're doing because, in the end, they still need me, right? So I think it is a fantastic fellowship to do, whether you want to do private or academics. It just makes yourself very marketable.
I agree with Rich on the job security issue and the marketability issue. When I was in academics, I did peds and breast, and then when I moved to private practice, I do peds, breast, and a ton of general. So I will tell you that if you can do pediatric work and you're willing to do general, you can get a job anywhere in the country. People need peds. They do need you to be flexible, though, especially if you're going to be a partner and you need to be in the general call pool. It's really unlikely that you're going to be able to do 100% peds unless it's a really large practice. But having those skills, I think, is vital. Practices are looking for that. Where everyone wants subspecialty coverage, all the hospitals want subspecialty coverage. If you have pediatric trained radiologists, then your practice looks better to your hospital. So I don't think you can go wrong with it. I knew I was going to do that.
Another question?
Oh, I'll wrap up my comments quickly. I can't speak to the peds directly. I can speak to the difference in private practice and academics. When I was in private practice, I did exclusively breast imaging. I didn't do any general. I didn't take any call. I pretty much worked 8 to 5. I was on an employee track, though. I wasn't in the general partnership track for the general call pool. And like I said, all breast all the time. When I came back to academics, it's pretty similar. I also read some general ultrasound. And I think you can kind of pick how much you want to specialize yourself or subspecialize yourself. And if you go to a large enough private practice and you are maybe willing to not be on the partnership track, then you might be able to focus on only your subspecialty area.
Hi, I'm Catherine Blair, fourth year resident at UT Houston. A lot of us have academic mentors, and so we're really great at getting feedback on an academic CV. I was just wondering if you guys had any advice for building a CV that we might want to give to a private practice group, because while I'm very proud of my publications and my posters, I would think that private practice may not be quite as interested in that. So I was wondering if you could give some advice about building a private practice CV.
Well, I'm an academic radiologist, so I'm going to pass this question along to someone else.
Yeah, building your CV as a resident fellow, what are your options? I mean, you can do publications. That makes private practices know that you're interested and involved in doing other things. You know, if you can participate in national conferences, if you can do speaking. Honestly, the ability to speak is probably the biggest thing that you need in any career you have, specifically in medicine. A lot of doctors just don't have that ability to give good presentations, to have good speaking skills when they're in meetings with their hospital directors. If you have anything that you can, you know, market in that way about yourself, that you've given presentations, that you know how to talk and give, you know, nice, well thought out presentations, that's important. Having a reasonable personality is helpful, so the interview it speaks a lot, not in addition to just the written CV. Participating in meetings, if you want to get involved in the business aspect of medicine, if you know your stuff. My advice in general would be to pick something that you're passionate about, find your niche, and know everything you possibly can about it. So you show up and you say, okay, I can add this. I know more about this than anyone else in your practice, and you need me because, you know, this is what I have to offer. So I don't have any recommendations for generalized CV boosters, but you find your place and you make your name relatively known in there, and then, you know, people will want to have you in their group.
And I think, as you said earlier, a big part of who you are in private practice and what you mean to your practice is what you do when you get there. So you're going to have to get your foot in the door. You're going to have to get an interview somewhere. Be personable during your interview. Be yourself so they know who you are. But when you get there, work hard, do the job, do it well, make yourself necessary. And that's what will keep you in the practice and impress the practice with you.
What I would add is that, and I sit on the private practice side looking at people that are applying for jobs, is that if there's nothing on their CV, like I want to hire stars. Like I want people that are stars. And if you're a star regardless. So if you've been killing it in your training the whole way through, you're probably going to be killing it in private practice too, right? Like you're just an overachiever. Like, so when I look at a CV, even though that's a CV for private practice, not academic, I look at it in the same way. Like I want somebody who's just been killing it their whole life. Like, wow, yeah, we need to get this person. Like all that poster stuff, all those abstracts, great, that's fantastic. That's been my 2 cents.
Courtney, go ahead.
Okay, we have a Twitter question. Okay, so they ask, if you could go back in time, what would you have done differently, or which skill would you have focused on more as a trainee to get where you are?
Do we tweet our answer?
Are you going to tweet it for us?
Thinking.
Yeah, I know.
It's a tough question.
So where I did my residency, we were really very work-oriented. And I felt like I left really ready to hit the ground running. And that's not something I would change, obviously. I can't think of something that I would change, but that's what I would instill in you. I would say, while you're a resident, get all the experience you can, learn from all the people you can. There are people who there will be things about them that you don't want to do, but that's something to learn also. Learn good ways to do things and learn ways that you don't like to do things, and try to take something away from everyone. But those 4 years, that's the time to learn as much as you can and to really commit as much as you can, because the more you know and the more efficient you are, the more ready you'll be to go when you start your first job.
I suppose if I could go back in time, I would start a little bit earlier, learning more of the business of medicine and more about the ins and outs of health economics. I've sort of started getting interested in that toward the end of fellowship, and when I started my career in academics. The American College of Radiology has tons of resources for residents and fellows. They do a Moorfield Fellowship that lets residents and fellows spend time learning the RUC process and some of that stuff. It would have been nice to do that earlier in my career instead of trying to learn it all really super quickly, reading thousands of pages of regulatory language at night when I have kids are in bed. But again, that's what I do, right? That's my social complexity. But if I've started earlier, I think if you're interested in that at all, then the more knowledge you can get in that area, especially if you want to be in private practice and you want to be the champion in your private practice for that side of things. We bought you all the time we could.
What's that?
We bought you all the time we could.
I happened to train at a residency program that I thought was a really well-rounded clinical residency program. We spent a lot of time looking at patients' charts. And so I don't know that this necessarily answers the question, but that's the kind of thing I would like to reinforce, or I try to reinforce in my residents. Spending time getting to know the patients, getting to know the clinical histories, and I think I did a good job of that during my residency, but to me, remember that we're physicians as well, that these are also our patients. And so to me, that's the kind of stuff that I would want to reinforce from like if I was looking back at myself in residency, just to continue to do that and to my residents now.
And one more thing that's more something I wish I had known than something that I would do differently is I felt like when I was a resident that people were like, if you go into private practice, you just sit there and you read studies all day long and you don't do anything else. And I feel like after having gone through private practice and kind of going to more national meetings and learning more, people in private practice do a ton more than just read studies. I mean, Lauren is super involved with the ACR and does so many things. And I think that often you aren't taught that when you're a resident, that you can do all of these different things and you can still be involved, and private practice is a good space to do that as well.
So I will answer the question, but it will be of no value to any of you because you already know it, right? The one thing that if I go back in time and I would have gotten engaged with organized radiology earlier. I wasn't at all. And you guys are already doing that, so you guys are already smarter than me. Like, I came to it late, doing this kind of stuff, being networked, going to resident fellow section meetings, being active with the RSNA, the ACR. I wish I had done that earlier.
Awesome. Great advice. Looks like we have another question.
Often as residents, we get comments like, oh, AI will take over the future. You shouldn't choose this subspecial, like for example, AI, all the mammograms in the future will be done by algorithms. Don't go into breast imaging. Don't go into MSK. We get all these comments. And my question really is, how do you think we can best prepare ourselves for a future where AI might not take over, but it might replace some of the work that we do? Should we all be doing procedures? Should we not just do diagnostic work? Like, it's quite an uncertain period for us, I think, with all this AI hype. So it's kind of like a general question.
Two comments really on that. First of all, I think it's unlikely that AI is going to replace any of us. I mean, I think that's kind of a general consensus among radiologists. We're image interpreters, we're image finders. We find things on the pictures and then we interpret things on the pictures. And if we have AI tools that are giving us 10 billion extra findings, well, that's just all the more interpretation that's necessary. So to be scared off from the field because of AI, I think is probably a little short-sighted. Secondly, how prevalent is AI really going to be in the near future? Until it becomes marketable and it has a way to be reimbursed, I don't think it's going to impact us too much at all. I mean, and just the fact that it can find some wow factor, find something on a picture isn't enough to really get any market penetrance until it's providing value and doing something, which honestly none of the tools out there right now are really been shown to do. I think it's going to be many years before we actually see it impact our workflow very much.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've done, being at an academic center, I have done like 1 or 2 projects on deep learning, but it's so preliminary. I don't think that this is anything that should impact how you decide what career you want to go into. And as Lauren was saying, I think ultimately it's going to be our job to embrace AI and figure out what our role is within it, but it's not going to replace us. It's going to be a matter of taking AI and figuring out how do we implement those tools. But I think that's very far down the line. I don't think it's should be a decision-making factor for you as far as what subspecialty you go into.
I think a long way down the road from now that AI will really enhance what we do, and it will be really cool, and we'll all really appreciate it. And probably right now, one of the most important things we can do is to, like Jordan was saying, embrace it, figure out how to use it, make it work for us, and design the tools for how it works best for us and how we can make it help us in the future.
So I referenced this in my talk. I do think it is fair, though, when you're evaluating practices, when you're looking at a practice and you're sort of evaluating them, I think it's a fair thing to think about, what do they think about AI? And what are they doing about it? Like, how are they thinking about it? Are they like, you know what, this AI stuff, it's not going anywhere, we're not really that worried about it, it's not a thing. Are their heads in the sand, or they're like, no, we actually think this is going to be a disruptive force in radiology. You know, we've got a little AI commission people in our group, they're really into this stuff, and they're looking at it, and they report back to the board, and they do stuff like that. You know, that's a different aspect of it.
Do you think we should be acquiring different skill sets to prepare us for this future where AI will be part of our work, or do you think we should just carry on doing what we do normally? Do you think we should be seeking different, like, more procedural skill sets, or?
Well, so Harry Jha from Penn wrote a paper with Topol, but he talked about, like, you know, in the future, their hypothesis, what's going to be the role of radiology is sort of like, and I forget the term they use, but, you know, it's sort of these, you know, information experts. And I think that may certainly evolve in that direction, you know, maybe. But I think for right now, this is going to echo what Lauren said. I think the best thing for trainees to do, to focus on, is becoming the best clinical radiologist that you can be, and absolutely have a laser focus on that, being a fantastic radiologist. And then as these things start getting added on, they need to bend to you. You know, technology bends to physicians. We shouldn't be bending to technology.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm not sure how many of you were at the ACR meeting a couple of years ago when Zeke Emanuel gave his talk, and it was like the doom and gloom of radiology, and everyone left and was depressed. And then the next day, Andy DeLeo gave this fabulous talk that was called Step Into the Light, and it was about how we're people, we're radiologists, and we take care of patients, and that's what we have to offer. It's that piece. It's that we can interpret the studies, like Lauren was saying, we interpret them. Jordan was saying, you know, get into their charts, get to know them. You're doctors, don't forget that. So it's that piece. It's that connection that's always going to make us different from machines.
And to your question of what skills should you be developing, I mean, your skills in AI and everything else is to figure out how you add value, how you add value to your practice, how do we as radiologists add value. And in the AI sphere of things, sometimes that means how can we control utilization, how can we keep costs down, and healthcare costs obviously are extraordinarily high and rising super fast. If you have an AI tool that comes in and finds more pulmonary nodules, then you're following up more pulmonary nodules, you're biopsying more things. If we, as the radiologist, can be stewards of that and say, okay, well, this may not be a good use of this technology because it's actually bad for patients, it's bad for costs and healthcare, then you've added value that way. So educating yourself and utilization costs and trying to figure out how you add value is going to make you more important than any AI tool that's out there.
Take the next question on my left.
Hey, I'm Vishesh Jain. I'm a fourth-year medical student at Vanderbilt. As I've gone through interviews, a lot of programs have talked about their fourth year and how that's custom, you know, you can build whatever you want in it. And I've gotten different advice from residents about, you know, you should do lots of different rotations, you develop all your skills before fellowship, or just specialize in something and really build your expertise in that subspecialty. And as we go toward more and more subspecialization, you know, I'll be doing that in 4 years. Is it your opinion that, you know, we should really use any free time we have to really delve into one particular area if we know that area, or should we be trying to get that broader collection of expertise?
Start with that one.
Yeah, go ahead.
The answer is yes. Like, that's
Sure.
the answer. The answer is yes. So my 2 cents is that's not a one-size-fits-all. That's very customizable. If you're thinking you want to go into a general practice, you're going to go someplace, particularly someplace more rural, and you're going to have to be, you might be the neuro person, but you're going to be doing a lot of general, then maybe you want to make sure your fourth year, and you're going to do a neuro fellowship separately, maybe your fourth year you want to be doing a lot of other rotations because you're going to be doing a lot more than neuro when you join. Alternatively, if you think you're going to be joining a large subspecialized practice where you're going to be doing mostly neuro, yeah, maybe you focus more on neuro. And I think it's customizable based on what you think you want to be doing, but it never hurts to be well-rounded.
Totally agree. And if you're at an institution that will let you use some of that time to do something like Lauren said and specialize in an area that's non-clinical and you think that might add value to you in whatever institution you're going to, absolutely do that, because you're never going to get that time any other time.
I agree with Rich. I was one of the first years to take the new board, so we did the whole mini fellowship thing, and I wasn't sure where I was going to go with my career, and I ended up doing like a 6-month mini fellowship all in breast, and I ended up doing a musculoskeletal fellowship, and I wanted to be well-rounded. I wanted to feel like I could, have skills that I could do if I wanted to do private practice, but then with my fellowship I decided I wanted to do academics. So I think it's important to stay well-rounded. I think it's important, but as Rich was saying, I think you kind of have to dig deep inside and figure out, do you want to be an uber academic and just really just focus on one specialty and put out a ton of papers in that? I think that's something you'll figure out as you go through the course of residency.
Thank you.
Don't have a lot to add. I agree with all of those guys. Honestly, when we're interviewing candidates, we don't necessarily look at what specifically they did their 4th year and make judgments based on it. What we like to see is, I don't mind hanging out back here, and I like anonymity back here. It's okay. Plus, the germs issue is a real thing here. But you do what you love, and your passion will show through. I think if it's something you really care about, then you're gonna do better at it, and you're gonna excel more in it. It's gonna be obvious to the people that are hiring you. And in the end, we want to hire people who, like Rich said, are really ambitious and want to do things. And it doesn't really matter exactly what sphere that's in. It's do you have those traits to show us that you're going to be a practice leader and somebody that's going to bring value to our practice.
We'll take the next question on the right.
Yeah, I'm an older radiologist, like at the end of my career, and I'm watching all of you coming up and trying to figure out how they're going to end their lives. I'm in that position now. I'm 67 and I have to retire, and I'm trying to figure out what I've got this practice, and now I'm going to sell it, I'm going to give it to someone. But all we know is that the times are going to be a-changing, and when I was a resident and I came to the RSNA, I thought there was going to be no more digital, there was going to be no more interventional radiology, because they just discovered DSA, which stands for Digital Subtraction Angiography. So we're seeing a lot of changes in radiology. We don't know what it is. I think all you've got to do is, you're a person, you've got a job, make sure you do your job properly, and if you do your job properly, there'll always be work for you. So just work hard at it, and I'm sure you'll find whatever you find. The goal is, we can't predict the future, but there'll always be something for us to do, because after all we are image interpreters, and there's always going to be a job for imaging interpreters. Whether you're going to be reading films, whether you're going to be managing people's work, whether you're going to be managing other doctors, or you're going to be managing IT, you're going to be in the job of understanding what images do.
Thank you.
So my question to the board is, how do we predict the future, and what do we do to try and understand where we want to be when you're my age? I never thought I was going to be here. I thought, what am I going to do? I'm going to get a job and I'm going to work. And what happens is everything keeps changing. You do something and then you think for 5 years, wow, I like this practice, I'm going to change. And then 5 years later, something happens and you change. And that's what you're going to be doing most of your lives. And just enjoy what you're doing for the moment, because tomorrow we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, but enjoy whatever it is today. So for the board, how do we predict the future of where do we really want to go to?
That's for Lauren.
I think it has something to do with Twitter and Bitcoin. So sometime between those two things, somehow that's going to come out in the future. The speaker before us, I think, really nailed it when she said that we have to be able to evolve. And healthcare payment is evolving. Health practice patterns are evolving. A lot of things are a lot different than they were even a decade ago. You just have to be flexible. You have to kind of be ahead of the game. So be educated, know what's going on, and be prepared so that you can be proactive about what you're doing and not reactive to it. And that's true at a practice level. You don't want to be making decisions when you're faced with crisis. You want to have those decisions laid out so that you're ready when that stuff comes, and from an individual level, because it's important, I think, in both ways. How do you predict the future?
I agree with all of that. I just think that the most important thing is to really figure out or try to figure out what you do that adds value, and just kind of keep up to date with the things that are going on in the ACR and just keeping up to date with emerging technologies. But I think, just being willing to evolve and recognizing that your job might take different, even within the same job, it might take different life forms throughout the course of it.
I like that radiology is constantly changing and that we kind of have to constantly evolve ourselves as it moves on. I get kind of bored doing the same thing for too long. So I was in private practice for a couple years. I realized that wasn't just the right fit. Then I moved to academics. Now I'm focusing my career more in some health services research and differences I can make there to make a bigger impact. So I like the idea of a constantly evolving profession and being flexible and adaptable to meet the needs of sort of today's health system. So I think you can really look at it as an opportunity to keep doing something interesting and to keep improving yourself and improving the field.
I have nothing to add. That was great. I think my colleague said it perfectly. I got nothing to add.
All right, we'll take a question on the right.
Hi, I'm a fourth-year resident. My question is more about private practice. Can you talk more about the partnership track and what are some of the nuances that a new grad might not be aware of?
So I didn't hear the last part of that question. Some of the what?
Some of the nuances that a new grad might not be aware of in terms of signing on to a partnership track.
Okay, so I think, is your question specifically about what to look for in the types of partnership tracks and what's out there?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's more about, because we might not know a lot about the little details that we should look for, and also nobody wants to feel taken advantage of.
Right.
So kind of what is common out there.
Yeah, okay. So there's different types of, first of all, you have to decide whether you want an associate track or a partnership track, and there's lots of variations of that out there today. I think for a while the job market was steering towards very few partnership tracks available out there. Not a lot of practices were hiring partners because the economy was down. They didn't have really the money to do that. Now there's more opportunity for partnership tracks. There's a couple of questions to look for. How long is the partnership track? So some of them are 1 year, some of them are 7 or 8 years, and usually there's a gradation of income up through there, a gradation of your rights in the practice until you get to the final one. So how long is the partnership track? What is the income structure along those years? What are your rights in the practice, your voting rights in the practice? So you want to know, at the end of your partnership track, are you fully vested and be able to vote on the board? Is there a buy-in? So practices that own their own equipment or own their own buildings will often have quite a bit higher buy-in than a practice that doesn't. And that's something to know, because at the end of your partnership track, then you're asked to pay $500,000. You need to figure out if you're ready for that and how to prepare for that. Let's see, what else for partnership track? That's mostly it. You said you don't want to get taken advantage of. It goes back to my point of, I don't think there's not really a lot of negotiation wiggle room for these contracts. But again, if it's something that you think is really unfavorable to you, then that's probably not a great practice, because if they're going to screw you over on your contract, they're probably not going to be super awesome to work for and other reasons. Did that help?
Yeah, that's great. Thank
you.
So I agree with everything Lauren says, as always. I would add a couple things, which is that think about what people mean by partner. Because people, we got this many years to partner, and so what do you mean by partner? And this is what I think what you were alluding to, so there's equity partner, voting partner, or is there actually one person who kind of owns the practice, and then you're a partner, meaning we're calling it a partner, and you get a little extra more money, but what else do I get? So what do they mean by partner? Are all partners equal? How many years to partner? And am I just partner eligible at 2 years? What percentage of people make it in that period of time? How many people aren't making partner? You always hear stories, again, I don't know any practice like this, but you hear stories about partnership track, nobody actually makes partner, or very few make partner. So I think that's a fair question to ask. How many people in the last many years have made partner? What percentage of people make partner? And when we hire somebody, we're very clear. This is partnership track. You're partner eligible in this period of time, but we're very clear and we're transparent. I think it's very fair. This is my opinion. It's extremely reasonable for you to ask what is expected of a partner. What does partnership mean to you, meaning to the group, and what is expected of a partner? That should be completely transparent, and the practice should be proactive about that. So if, let's say you're, should be a partner at the end of 3 years, it shouldn't be a surprise on 3 years and 1 day that you didn't make partner. They should have been meeting with you along the way. If they're doing their job as the practice, they should have been meeting with you along the way and saying, look, here's why, we think you need to be working on this. It should never be a surprise. And I would add one more thing, which is that, again, I'm in a partnership track private practice, but I would also add that while I wanted to be a partner and that whole idea, that the things that you want, think about what you want from partnership, because I have friends that are employed models and they're employed by the hospital. They're not partnership track, there is no partnership. But the things that they would want from partnership, like they control their practice, like they control radiology, they make good money, all those things you want from partner, they have all those things. So just because you're a partner doesn't mean you're going to get all those good things, and just because you're in a group that doesn't have partnership like that, you're an employed model, doesn't mean you're not going to get those things either.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. You have to remember, with partnership comes responsibility, and if they do an assessment and a bunch of the outpatient locations need new roofs or something, they can give you an assessment and you may have to pay a little bit of extra. So there's a lot of benefits, but you have to consider the responsibility of what comes with being a partner also.
All right, we'll take a question on the left or here on the right.
Hi, I'm Ed Calloway. I'm a medical director for VRAD, teleradiology company. And what I've noticed is that there was no mention of teleradiology in the talk today, and I see teleradiology as a legitimate third pathway out from academics and private practice. There are over 60% of practices around the US that use teleradiology. In the slide that you showed, overnight radiology, although that was probably referring to on-site locations, is still a high hiring position. And so who's doing all of that overnight radiology? Well, by and large, it's teleradiology companies. We have folks that have worked 15 years in this specialty. I've been in it 12, and I could easily do another 10 if I were interested, but I'll probably retire in a couple of years. But the point is that it's a legitimate third pathway. There are certainly significant limitations sometimes, and that needs to be taken into account. But in terms of how you see where you need to fit in with your lifestyle or your expectations of what you want out of life to be happy, that's a place to look at. I would reiterate as well that this is a specialty where you need to keep up. The remarks earlier about continuing learning and how this is all changing, that's true. When he mentioned that when he was young, he had digital subtraction and geography. When I started, it was the first CT in Oklahoma. There are changes coming, and the only way that you will adapt, it's not necessarily I need to start and learn new procedures, but just keep up with what is going on in the specialty, and you will always have a job. And the last comment is that in terms of networking, be sure to be a member of your local city or state societies. Those are the places to network. If you need to change jobs, those are the guys that you will be talking to that will know your work as you get involved with all of these other components of the profession.
Thank you very much. Take a question here on the left.
This is a comment. I'm a private radiologist in a practice in South Africa. But I think for me it is, and I think the important question you need to ask yourself, it is, why did you do radiology in the first place? Because it is a lifestyle choice. You're not going to only do it for 4 years. The 4 years is the easy part. I always tell the residents, passing your exams is the easy part. It is what you're doing with that exam afterwards, because that's going to take you 25 years, 30 years as well. We have one of our senior partners have retired now at the end of this month, will be retiring. So our main problem is not who can we get, but what kind of person can we get. Because everybody knows the knowledge, we have the knowledge. But for us to work with somebody, it will be your attitude for the next 20 years, 30 years. So sometimes you just need to look at, can you fit into a practice, and people from the outside will look, the panel will look, can we work with this individual for the next 20 years? And we have interviewed now 4 people, and we said, no. We will probably be able to work with you for 4 days. But your attitude is so bad, it stinks actually. We will not be able to work for you for 20 years, the next 20 years as well. So look at yourself and say, am I a people's person. Will I be able to work as a team, or I am just like an individual? I will do my own thing, go my own tandem, own way in it as well. Because that is important for us as well. In South Africa, I think we have about less than 1,000 radiologists in a population of 50,000 as well. But for us, we will rather work harder than work with somebody for the next 20 years that we can't get along with.
Thank you. Do you have another question?
Yeah, if that's all right. This is a question mostly for Dr. Heller, but also for everyone. In terms,
Can't be good.
you talked a lot about the changes that are happening already in healthcare and for radiology in terms of consolidation, specialization, and so on. Do you have thoughts about changes that we could make in medical education to help prepare our trainees, both for undergraduate and graduate medical education, to help train ourselves and our future for those changes, whether at like a micro level for like an individual professor or like at a macro level, like how do we systems?
So something that I've learned through my work with the Macro Commission and the ACR is that I learn a lot from Lauren. So it's always better when Lauren goes first.
Okay.
And I listen to what she says. See?
Fair enough.
Exactly. Let Lauren go first. No, but I'll actually echo something that Lauren already said, which is that I think that, again, this is my opinion, training programs, you're right, you're fine. But I'm not throwing you under the bus, I'm throwing myself under the bus on this one. Is that training programs could do a better job educating residents, this has been my experience, on the economics of radiology, how we make money, how the sausage is made. That when I go and give talks on MACRA and healthcare policy at training programs, they're usually very thankful that I'm doing it because this is the only way they're getting it. They're not getting those lectures on sort of dictation to dollars. How does what we do clinically actually translate into money? And that's an incredibly important skill to have, whether you're going to go into private practice or academics. You just should understand how we're actually getting paid. And so I wish we did a better job at that. I wish I had gotten more of that. And it's an important thing that we should be learning about.
I guess since Rich took my first answer, I'll have to come up with a second answer. But I'll go back to something else I said. Is that I think that probably the biggest skill you can get is presentation skills and speaking skills. Doctors are terrible at it. Radiologists are even worse at it because we sit in dark rooms and try not to talk to people most of the days. But if you can show up and you know how to speak to your hospital administrator, if you know how to speak to these people, you're invaluable. And everywhere, whether you're in your local practice, if you're talking nationally, if you're speaking at conferences, if you're at the RUC, if you can speak that language and do it well and come across well, there's really nothing that can stop you. So I would think that residency programs and training programs could focus on that, maybe giving us the skills that we have to communicate better and to have better speaking skills.
Did you not like my talk?
No. Rich specifically needs better training on this.
I would just caution to not swing the pendulum too far. While all of the extra skills and extra non-clinical things that we can do are extremely valuable, remember while you're a resident just to learn to be a good radiologist. That's the main point of being there.
Thank you.
All right.
Hi, my name is Natasha Mung. I'm a radiology resident at Metro R2. I have a question for Dr. Golding and for those of you who are kind of more closely associated with ACR. What is your role in terms of healthcare policy and how do you implement that in your private practice?
So for me, that's kind of a chicken or the egg question. So I started in my private practice by, when I switched over to private practice, MACRA had just dropped and we were trying to figure out MIPS and how to figure all that out, and nobody in my practice knew anything about it. I said something to someone in my group about MIPS, and they're like, "Oh, what we do for CTPE studies, we do that. We got that." I'm like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. No one had a clue. And I was like, whoa, there's clearly a knowledge gap here. So I took it upon myself to figure it out and try to lead that for my practice. They saw that as very valuable and indispensable. So for me, it was kind of the practical knowledge of putting it together for my group. And then when I would reach out to some of the ACR people to figure out, answer questions, I thought, well, these are people who are equally pathologically interested in this as me. And so then I got involved with that sort of secondarily. I'm the vice chair of the MACRA committee on the ACR. I go to the RUC and do a lot of that stuff. But I sort of started by having that knowledge. The ACR's the ACR physicians are all volunteers. There's a staff that are fantastic, but they don't really have the time to like train you to know what you're doing. So if you come in with that knowledge and you've already done it, then they've got places to plug you in right away. They do have the Moorfield Fellowship that gives you an experience of what the economic side of things looks like. But my advice for anybody that wants to get involved is to read about it, to figure it out, to learn how to do it, and then say, hey, I'm ready, come put me somewhere. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. What is the name of that fellowship that you mentioned?
The Moorfield Fellowship,
Moorfield.
M-O-O-R-E, Moorfield.
Thank you.
So I serve on the MACRA Commission with Lauren, and then there's actually a couple stars in the room. I think, if I can see that far, I think Greg Nicola, who's the vice chair of the ACR Economics Commission and headed up the MACRA, as well as, I think, is Melissa over there too? Like, I think I may have seen her. And to my knowledge, everyone that sort of got involved with this just had an interest in it. Like, and again, they're all volunteers, and everyone, if you want to do it, if you want to be involved, reach out, because literally that's all I did. Like, I thought it was kind of cool. Like, I didn't know that much, but I was kind of learning to teaching myself through JACR stuff. And then I met people like Lauren and Greg, and they would just educate me, and I would send Greg like all these emails like, hey, I'm confused on this. And he would very, very politely respond like, that's because you didn't read this. Oh, cool, okay, thanks. And then I would send him another email, and he'd be like, he would answer, and they educated me, but then brought me up, and then, hey, can you work on this? Can you help with this? And so then there's two levels. One is you work at it at the college level, which is fantastic. It's a way to sort of give back to our specialty. And then it is kind of cool to, with our own practice, yeah, we have a revenue cycle management team, of which I sit on our revenue cycle management team. No, I'm not a career revenue cycle manager. We've got people who do that. But it's great that they have physicians who are engaged, because we give them a very useful perspective, because they may be billing and coding and paying experts for sure, but they're not physicians. And so it's great that you can have a physician, somebody who's actually in the trenches doing the work, who understands their language and understands the policy, who can work with them as they craft policies to make your private practice be more efficient. As I think one of the speakers, and I think it was admitted, but I'm not sure, said, you can do well, you don't do well just by reading more films. There are other ways to do well. And one of them has to do with, how's your revenue cycle management process? And it's great if you can be a physician who understands that process and they can contribute to your practice.
I'm just going to say, thank goodness there are so many people who are so interested in health policy. But I think, health policy is a really important area to radiology. There are obviously people in this room who can help you if you're interested in getting into that area, like in any other area.
I echo all of that. I don't do health policy,
Right.
so
Yeah.
maybe I'll email them afterwards too.
We're going to get on the committee. We're going to learn about it.
All right, I think we'll take our last question here on the right.
MACRA, MIPS.
Hi, I'm an R4, Auctioneer Clinic, New Orleans. I've been on 2 private practice job interviews, and they both asked, how fast do you read? And I just didn't know the best way to answer that. I mean, relative to my peers, what's a good way to answer that question?
That's actually something I was going to bring up earlier, and I forgot when we were talking about interviewing skills. Private practices are interested in the volume that you're used to, and different residency training programs see vastly different volumes. And some of them are very busy. The residents can go through a lot of studies quickly. Some of them are not. And if the private practice is high volume, then they don't want to hire somebody who's slogging through 10, 15 studies a day. So I think it's a fair question. I think it should be a little bit of a flag for you to ask them the same question, what volume do you expect of me? And if it's something you're not comfortable with, then you should take that into account of how you're doing. But the other thing is, from an education standpoint, when I was in residency, I had no idea what my RVUs per year were. I didn't know its number of studies. But your residency director keeps all that. They had certain requirements. You have to read a certain number of chest x-rays. So they know all that. It's probably worth going to them and asking for what those numbers are, so you have that. If you're an outlier, then I suppose you could say you didn't know when they asked you the question. But then at least you know where you stand on that continuum. But then you also have a framework to put their answer to that. So if they tell you the average one does 15,000 RVUs a year, then you know whether that's something that you can or can't do. I think it's a fair question for them to ask. Our practice is very busy. We have high volume stuff, especially our call is very high volume. And if somebody's not capable of doing it, then we're not trying to be mean, but they may not be the best fit for our practice and our call schedule. So something that you should know, you could get that information, and that you should be armed with when you go on your next interview.
And also to know if you are going to be accountable for the RVUs that they expect. Will that be worked into your compensation somehow? If you don't hit your 80 RVUs for the day? Are you going to have to stay and take part of call until you hit that? Just to understand and make sure that there's clarity on what the expectation is. The private practice I was in, actually during the day on your computer screen, there were like these RVU bars that went across the bottom that showed you, and I think it showed the number of studies you had read, the number of RVUs you had accumulated, and then you could see everybody else in the practice too. So you, and I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but yeah, so
It's
it exists.
It's yellow until you hit your goal, and then it's green. It's actually kind of satisfying, you know. It's so. But she brings up a good point that if they're asking you how fast you read, then you should probably ask them how they track RVUs and how they hold you accountable for it. So is it something that's publicly available, or are they actually, you know, are there financial penalties to not reading fast enough, or having to stay late or work your extra days? So more and more practices are tracking it. Fewer are actually using that to penalize people, but it's worth asking and finding out what their policy is.
And just to allude back to something I said earlier during my talk, is that practices have personalities. Like, there are going to be practices out there, just like I said, that like, you know, yeah, we work 14-hour days, we read 2,300 MRIs a day. What are you talking? Crazy. Like, people will say stuff, you know, crazy stuff. And then other practices that are much more, you know, yeah, we work 8-hour days, we work this, we, you know, we take 6 weeks vacation. You can find different practice personalities. And the other thing that I would add is that whatever you think your speed is, like right now in residency, your first year in private practice is like another fellowship. Like, I don't know what your fellowship was. Your first year, at least your first 6 months, if not your first year of being in private practice, there's a very, very steep growth curve. At least that's been my experience with myself and other colleagues, is that, you know, you come in at one level out of training. I don't care where you were, but your first year in private practice, there's a steep growth curve in terms of knowledge base, but also in terms of efficiency. And I don't know if that's been other people's experience. But
And you're making a lot of changes. You know, when you switch to a new job anywhere, be it private practice or academics, you know, you might have to learn a new PACS system and a new dictation system and a new other kind of reporting system. You have to meet all the new techs and the new sonographers and learn who you trust and who you don't trust. So you're doing all of that at the same time as you're learning to read the higher volume. So it's just a totally new experience to adjust to.
You also are developing a confidence in your own, so in residency and fellowship, you're reading for someone else who's signing off your report, so you kind of have to adjust your style and what you mention and what you might let go. When it's you signing the report, if you don't want to mention that retroaortic renal vein, don't. I don't. I leave it out, and that makes me faster. But there's certain things that you choose to be okay with or not, and that's your own style. And I think that makes you faster, gives you more confidence. But it's a process, because at first you're probably a lot less confident because you don't have that second person looking at it afterwards. But then once you get your own rhythm, it's probably a steep incline after that.
I can't really speak for private practices, but I would be hesitant if a private practice was expecting you to read, you know, your peak amount the very first day you get there. You know, I think they want to see growth. It's kind of like running a marathon. When you start training, like 8 miles seems long, and then all of a sudden 8 miles doesn't seem as long. Your numbers will pick up, like, because even in academics, I remember my first day I read like maybe 30 studies, and I was like, oh my God, I like couldn't believe I did that much. And then I'm like, are you serious? Now, you know. So I think, you know, even whatever numbers they're probably throwing out at you, just realize that your first day is probably not what they would expect. At least I would hope not.